Hi, Paul. How are you today?
I'm great, Gemma. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
Good to
So
see you
I want
too.
to welcome everyone to our live chat this afternoon. We're here with Paul Nightingale, who has been the General Counsel of HP Hood for the last 16 years. Prior to that, he spent some time at Cabot Corporation, and he also spent time in-house practicing environmental law at Goodwin Procter and Hoare. He graduated from the University of Michigan Law School, so that's a pretty high level of and very quick background about Paul. And today we're going to talk about his path to GC and hopefully provide some insights to the membership who are listening in about that path, Paul. So thanks again for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this. I think the first question that we have, so we have gotten some questions ahead of time from the audience, folks that signed up, and we'll try to field questions live as we go along as well. The first question, Paul, is what were some of the biggest adjustments you faced moving from private practice to in-house?
Well, my path was a little unorthodox, so it might be helpful to just talk about that briefly, and then I can touch on that question. I was a specialist lawyer. I was an environmental attorney at Goodwin for 10 years before I went in-house, and that practice evolved quite a bit over the time that I was in it, and it became harder to get really interesting work over time. And so I had an opportunity to go in-house at Cabot Corporation in the mid-90s to be their senior environmental attorney, and there was a staff of a few other attorneys on at the time. So, I jumped at that and went in-house on that basis. And I'd say the biggest adjustments to moving in-house are the pace, for one thing. The pace is different than it is in a firm, at least a high-powered firm like Goodwin was. Certain firms are different in their approach, but so I had to sort of get used to that. I had to get used to having a dotted line relationship to a non-lawyer, which was a different situation for me. I'd always reported, obviously, to the partnership at the firm, I had to get used to a variety of different types of people. In a law firm, everybody's either a lawyer or support staff for the lawyers, and we sort of have the similar mindset and approach to the world. Whereas when you go in-house, you got to deal with engineers and operations people and marketing people and all sorts of different types of people who have different views on things, and so it takes some getting used to. It took me some getting used to anyway, and but it's also one of the more enriching parts of going in-house is that you sort of get exposure to a lot of things that you would not have had in the private world. I was at Cabot for 6.5 years, and for 3.5 of those years, I was the senior environmental counsel. I then had an opportunity to go to Harvard Business School and get some business training in a executive management program, which I did, and was thinking at the time of leaving the law and becoming on the business side. But actually, that experience reinforced my original decision to go to law school, as I decided I prefer to be a lawyer and not go to the business side. And so I came back to Cabot and started doing a whole bunch of different things and sort of trying to broaden my scope and portfolio. And I think that was really key to being able to get the job at Hood and then being able to become general counsel, is taking on things that I had never done or contemplated doing when I was in a law firm or in my specialty practice area. And so I sort of learned employment law at Cabot, because we didn't have an employment lawyer. We need somebody to help sort that out. And I helped manage a tax restructuring that we did, and I did some other deal related things. And those were all very fulfilling and fun to do. And then that allowed me, when the Hood job came available, to have the broader base of experience that let me step into that job and then ultimately into the role of general counsel. So the other tip I would say, one other thing is about being in-house, is that unlike a firm, when you get sort of funneled into, or at least a big firm that I was in, where you get funneled into a practice area with with a sort of focus on that area, and that's all you do every day. In an in-house situation, you've got stuff coming at you from all sides, a lot of stuff you've never heard of before, things that you don't know anything about that you have to sort of get up to speed on, at least enough to be able to direct how the company is going to handle them. And so I actually love that part of being in-house. It's the variety of the work and the opportunity to do a whole variety of different things that you never really get in a law firm that's a big one anyway, where you get channeled into a very narrow path. So I'd say that was one of the really positive aspects of going in-house for me. I can't hear you, Gemma.
So you mentioned getting to know other personalities other than just lawyers and support for lawyers, and then you mentioned the business school. How critical, if someone's thinking about becoming a general counsel, how critical is it to have that understanding of the business and managing or interfacing with folks outside of the legal profession?
Well, both are essential, I think. I mean, you need to learn the business, and the first thing I would do is, someone comes new to in-house or is, contemplating going in-house, is do all you can to learn about the business, because it's really key to the driver of everything that you do. So that's really critically important. And frankly, I don't think you can be successful in-house unless you're able to work well with non-lawyers, with people in different disciplines, people who may look at the world a little differently than you, and so it's really important to, if you don't have that skill, to work on developing that skill, because it's something you're going to need in order to succeed. And certainly, if you're in the GC seat, you have to have that ability, because the GC is interacting with all sorts of different constituents in the company, and if you can't do that, you'll fail in your job, I'm convinced. So you need to have that ability, and it's different than what we learn in law school and a lot of what we do in a law firm, but it's helpful in life, frankly, to be honest, more than just in the company. So.
Right. Talk a little bit about the pace. You mentioned that the pace is different in-house, and I'm curious about being a staff attorney or a senior attorney and being GC, and the pace in comparison to both that and private practice.
Well, I would say the pace is, in a firm, you're constantly, trying to meet your clients' demands, and the demands seem to always grow and be greater, and the time pressures are tremendous. In-house, it's not always like that. It is sometimes like that. There are clearly times when it is like that. Mm-hmm. There are other times when things are slower, and you've got more time to sort of work on stuff or get things done that you might have had to put off and such. I mean, it depends on the company too. Different companies are going to have different paces for sure. The ones that I've worked at have had, I would say, reasonable paces. I mean, Cabot was a very large international company, so there was a lot of travel involved there, and that, if you don't like that, that's not, you should avoid a company like that, because I had to travel to be successful in that job. Here I travel some, but not as much, not nearly as much. And if you walk in here at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm usually one of the first people here, and if I leave here at 6 o'clock at night, I'm usually one of the last people out the door. And so it's just not the same as it is in a firm where you got people till 8, 9 o'clock at night often. Frankly, that's one of the good things about it, in my opinion. I think working all night is not what I have in mind. Is something I want to do. So.
Have you noticed any different, for my part, in this current environment, I seem to be working extraordinarily long hours. There's a greater demand based upon the pandemic. Has that impacted your work life?
Yeah, no question about it. Yes, the answer is certainly yes. I would say it's gotten quieter of late, but until about a month ago, I would say 50% of what I did was pandemic-related legal mm-hmm. advice. Travel restrictions, closure requirements. We have a committee here where we have about 8 senior people in the company who are on a committee to help us figure out what we're going to do about COVID and how we're going to respond to it. And of course, I'm on that committee. We have calls every 3 times a week just to check in to see what the status is. We've dealt with all sorts of issues. People with weird situations, or can we travel to places that the travel restrictions exist, and Hood is an essential business, so we have been able to stay in operation throughout the COVID situation. Our office workers are mostly at home, not totally, but most of them are. But our plants are running and have been running, from the get-go, and so we've had a variety of things we've had to deal with in that regard. But knock on wood, we've been pretty successful at dealing with them so far. We
okay,
still haven't shut anything down, so that's good.
Another question we have here is on your career path to GC, what would be, in your view, the most important steps or key items on your resume, like the things you must do if your goal is to become a general counsel?
Well, I think the business education helped me in that regard for sure. I think coming back to Cabot and taking on additional tasks was very helpful as well. During my core practice as an environmental lawyer, I did a lot of deal work. I did a lot of transactional stuff that related to environmental matters or had environmental issues associated with them. And I think that has been immensely helpful because that's something that we just do all the time here. And so, for me anyway, I would think those 3 or 4 items were probably the most important. As I said, my path was a little unorthodox. Most people, I think, get to that job by starting out as corporate attorneys in either firms or in a company and then working their way to that position. So I also think just having a mindset of being willing to take on stuff that's sort of outside your comfort zone is very important, and that helps a lot to broaden your base and broaden your level of experience and hopefully allow you to become someone that people are interested in looking to hire for those jobs.
I wonder though, so I also had an area of expertise or specialization before I became a GC. Do you think delving into environmental law to the extent that you did when you were at Goodwin Procter and then at Cabot helped you along your path?
Well, I think it did in some sense, in the sense that it helped me to understand what it's like to be a specialist, what it's like to focus intently on a particular subject, and be able to become expert at certain areas of that subject. I don't have that luxury or need anymore because now I need to sort of be a jack of all trades. So I do more issue spotting and looking for resources to provide answers as opposed to figuring the answers out myself or working on them myself. But yeah, I think it did help me, and it probably in tangible ways more than tangible ones for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks for that. So another question here is on the positive aspects of being a general counsel. Can you articulate some of those?
Well, certainly. I mean, one of the really overwhelmingly positive and fulfilling things is being able to impact the business and the direction of the business, and to have a material role in senior management and what the company is doing in the direction it's taking. I'm part of the core senior leadership team here. We have regular meetings. We all weigh in on major issues, and it's really fulfilling to be able to do that and to have a real impact on the day-to-day operation of the company. And in a law firm, no matter how prominent the firm is or how prominent the lawyer in that firm is, they rarely get that opportunity to do something like that. So I'd say that's one of the most important things for sure. You get a lot of heightened visibility in the role. Some people like that, some people don't like that. If you don't like that, it's probably not a role that you want to aspire to, but if you do, it certainly gives you that platform, and people take you very, very seriously when you talk about things, particularly internally in the company. One of the issues about moving in-house that many lawyers, I think, may find, or if you haven't found it yet, you probably will, is that when you open your mouth, people tend to look at you like you know more than they do. And so that's not always true, by the way, but sometimes it certainly, you can have that effect on people. So you have to sort of learn to be careful about how you talk with other people too, in a way, because you don't want them to overinterpret things that you say. So, with that comes a certain amount of responsibility. Over time and after having done it for a while, you kind of learn that, and you learn how you impact other people's view of both you and of what you're saying and what companies should be doing. But the visibility thing is definitely an issue that may not be for everybody, and for people who don't like it, they probably want to avoid the GC role. Another thing that I find really, really fun, a lot more fun than I thought I would find, is working with outside firms that we use, and we use a number of them. And not only are they a great helpers to our business, but they're, the people we hire tend to be generally really good people who have a lot of interesting things going on in their lives, and I really enjoy the opportunity to interact with them and to hear about their lives and what they're doing, and to learn from them. It's amazing. You can learn a lot from your outside lawyers, and I would emphasize to people who are new, especially, to take advantage of that to the extent you have the ability to use outside counsel and have the ability to work with them. I would say the other thing that I really enjoy doing is mentoring people here, the younger lawyers. I have 2 lawyers on my staff and that paralegal, and it's a lot of fun and very rewarding to mentor those folks and to work with them and to help them be successful themselves. And I think, to me, my success hinges a lot on their success, and if they're successful, then that'll help me to be successful as well. So I enjoy the opportunity to help make that happen.
So on that external counsel piece, I have found that really forging partnerships with external counsel makes a big difference in the way the matters go and the expense. Can you talk a little bit about that in your experience at Hood with your external team?
For sure. I would say that partnerships are key to a successful relationship with outside counsel. I certainly feel like, we have that here with our outside counsel. I tend to be an involved general counsel. I don't just give things to firms and say, here, go handle them and come tell me when they're all taken care of. I want to be involved and engaged in the process of doing that. I want to, talk about strategy and be consulted about strategy as we go forward on major matters. And I think that's the model that we follow here. I think I actually saw, and I don't want to get into the specifics, but I saw situations in my early life in the firm, and then once I left the firm, where people had adopted a different approach, whereas they really sort of gave the firm free rein to handle the matter as the firm saw fit. And there was a lot of abuse associated with that. Whether intended or not is not the issue, but there were definitely firms that took advantage of the ability to sort of run a matter without a lot of oversight from the client. Well, the way I practice is I'm going to be involved in watching what's going on and being involved in what's going on, and that really involves partnering with our outside lawyers and having them understand my expectations of how we're going to work and operate. And I think if you were to ask them, they would probably describe me as fair, reasonably demanding and fair, but not certainly not always one who's going to do everything they say.
Right. Okay. So let's turn to the downsides of being a GC. When you think about it in the context of your other roles, what would you give away if you could?
Well, certainly there's heightened pressure. Obviously, that's a big one. You have to be somewhat at the beck and call of your chairman and CEO and the other senior leaders in the company. And if there's a big mess on the legal side of any matter, you're going to end up owning that mess, whether you cause it or not. So you have to be prepared to deal with that pressure and live with it, and not let it get to you. And so I think I've managed to do that over the course of my years. But that's the sort of the big downside that I guess is the most important one. Budgetary accountability is clearly one. You've got to pay attention to budgets. Fortunately, the environments that I've worked in, that has not been a huge issue, in the sense that the business people I work for understand that legal is tough to budget for. You start a year and you think you're going to spend X dollars, and often it's almost never anywhere near X. It's either way below or way above, seems like. But you do have to worry about that, and you have to worry about what the allocation of resources in the most efficient manner. It's all about. And then, of course, if you don't like, the other can be a downside is managing people when there's issues or difficult issues that need to be addressed. But But it goes to the territory, and it's something you got to do. But it's never fun to tell somebody that they're not working out or that they need to change the way they're doing things.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say
When
those
you
are the
think of
top ones for me.
when you think about your work life, how much of your time is spent on those management type activities, and what is spent on, I'll characterize it as practicing law?
Well, I would say it changes all the time, obviously, but I'm going to say maybe 30% on management and the balance on practicing law, roughly. But in any given week, it could be 50 to 60 to 70% on management. It just depends on what's going on and what time of year it is and what the need is. But a fair amount is spent managing for sure.
And you did mention you have a small department, so I suspect there's some variance in that depending on the type of law department. And
I'm sure that's true. And Hood is a
Right.
private legal company, and so we have a very small legal staff here, 2 lawyers and a paralegal and an admin and myself. We outsource a lot of work that, litigation, employment matters, things like that, to firms. But we do a lot ourselves, but almost all of our contract work we do ourselves. A smallish deal we'll do ourselves, depending on the size of the transaction, what's involved, and the workload. But we do rely on our outside firms to help us with major things. So there's a constant balance of what we send out and what we keep inside, but I think we've got it down pretty well now to know the most efficient way to get things done here.
Okay. So when you're looking forward now from where we are today, the audience would like to know what challenges you think are the most significant. What are we facing looking forward?
How about putting down the pandemic first and foremost? Getting back to normal, whatever that means.
Right.
I don't know that we know what normal means anymore or will until this is over with. Clearly that is important. Of course, associated with that is the whole prospect of remote work. And how much remote work will happen once the pandemic reason for the remote work is gone. And I think at our company here, at least, the people who run our company are really wanting people to be back in the office and back at work and not working from remote locations. I have 3 sons. Every one of them is in the tech industry. Every one of them is working remotely, and some of them are looking at the prospect of working remotely for the next few years, which is a completely different world and one that is very different than the way Hood operates. So obviously, different industries are going to tackle that issue differently, and that's going to create challenges. I think lots of challenges for lots of different industries. Personally, I think there's nothing like being present physically at work every day, where people can pop in your office and talk to you about things, play aside in the hallway and ask a question about something. It's just much harder to do when people are remote. And so I think my personal prediction is most people are going to go back to working, in offices, but it may take a little while for that to happen. Technology is a big part of our future for sure. We have a antiquated and sort of clunky contract management system that we're looking to fix, hopefully soon. We really want to get something better and more efficient, so we're going to be looking for that over the next year, try to figure out what to do there. We've sort of embraced DocuSign last January, and our timing was perfect because COVID hit, and now we've got everything done remotely anyway. So, if you're not using DocuSign, you should be, because it's definitely the way of the future, and it's something that has made life infinitely easier for us once we implemented it. Always adding value to the business. I think that just sort of goes with the territory, and we're sort of keep focused on that. But I think the technological stuff is going to be probably the most important as we go forward, at least over the next couple of years, as we sort of get a new contract management system in place, and the company is also going through a big ERP project here, so we're going to be impacted by that in some ways in the law department once it's rolled out.
And there's an interesting intersection here of staffing, doing more with less technology, external counsel, and finding that perfect mix, I think. I'm curious, when you think about automation, you mentioned you do all of your own contracts. How do you see that impacting legal departments, in-house departments going forward?
Well, I mean, I obviously it's going to depend on the type of business, right, and how many contracts you have. I mean, we're able to do it barely, I would say. We had to set some standards, like very small items. We don't, if it's under $50,000, we don't want to even hear about it because we just can't handle that kind of volume. But we do try anything important or reasonably important. We want to, have a look at before it goes out, and then once it's been executed, we want to get back here in the law department so we can control it and put it into our system. That challenge is going to be with us, I think, going forward. And, I assume technology will make it better and make it easier to do, but it's going to remain with us, I think, as long as we practice law. And by the way, you mentioned the word perfect. There's no perfect. I'm a firm believer. I'm a firm believer in the sort of the 80% rule. If you get 80% of it right, in most cases, not always, but in most cases, at least when you're in-house, that's enough. And so we're not expecting perfection, but we're expecting something very good that allows us to be confident that we have everything under control and we know where we can find things and we know how to how to be sure that we take action on stuff that matters to the company and the business, for sure.
Okay, so I have a question from one of the participants around the GC's role in cybersecurity readiness. In your role with HP Hood, how does cybersecurity impact you? What's your role there?
Well, it does impact us. I think it impacts everybody to some degree or another. We have a committee that we formed maybe 2 years ago, a cybersecurity committee of tech people, of business people, and myself and one of my junior lawyers is on it. I rely on my junior lawyer to be the sort of expert on the California law and the EU law, which doesn't really affect us because we don't do business in the European Union, but we want to know what these laws are about and how they're likely to affect us in the future. So we monitor the field. We sort of provide legal advice to the committee. We are members of that committee, and we sort of talk about decisions that are made on enhancing security. We have a fairly robust effort here. Most of our issues and concerns relate to back office and plant operations. We're worried. Everything's automated in our plants, so we want to make sure that we don't have people going in there and trying to shut them down and exact ransoms from us. So those are our main concerns, I think, when it comes to cybersecurity. I think we do an okay job. It's so far we've been able to manage it okay. We'll hope we can continue to do so, but we'll see.
Okay. So there's a question here on smaller legal departments. When you have a crisis like COVID or another business continuity issue or force majeure issue, how does that impact a smaller legal department? How do you manage that?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it impacts us a whole lot differently than it would a bigger department. Since we went remote, one of my key concerns was staying connected with my people and making sure that we were communicating regularly and that we knew what others were doing and that we, we're not leaving people, out there by themselves and without any, lifelines or connections. So, we have a call twice a week. It usually lasts about half an hour where we share with each other what we're doing, what we're working on, what issues are happening in the company, just sort of to take the place of the everyday engagement we would have if we were all in the office every day. I think that's been important, frankly. It's helped us to stay together as a team. It's helped us to understand what each other is working on, and I learned a lot from those calls by listening to my people and hearing what they have to say and what kind of demands are coming to them. A lot of they're often the first line of defense when a legal issue brews up, and people often bring it to them and then they'll bring it to me if they think I need to get involved in it. So really, that to me, that the communication with my team is the most important element of keeping the thing together during COVID. The rest of it, fortunately, we have computers. We do most of our work in them. we all have the ability to do that at home, and so we can be home working just as effectively as we are in the office, and that's been very helpful to keeping everything under control as we proceed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A question here about the nature of a GC's relationship with executive management. You mentioned that at the beginning of the chat. Can you talk a little bit about that, some key elements when interfacing with other executives?
Yeah, well, it's really important to establish relationships with the other senior executives of the company. I mean, they become, most of the people I give advice to are those people. Sometimes it's their underlings, but often it's them. And you need to have a relationship with them where they can trust what you're telling them. They know that when you're giving them the legal advice or giving them advice, even if it's of a business nature, that that they have some confidence in you and in what you're telling them, and that they can rely on that advice, going forward. Obviously, establishing a good working relationship with the CEO is critically important. Fortunately, I've had that since the day I walked in here, and that's an important relationship in any organization between the general counsel and the guy who they report to. But taking the time to go to meetings, group meetings, go out at night for dinner after them, the time in the bar, after dinner when people are just hanging out, and it's important to invest time in those things when you're in, I think, anywhere you work, but especially when you're in-house, because that helps to build the camaraderie and the team spirit and the feeling that we're all working together on this and pursuing this together. So I've been here long enough now that a number of the people who are in the senior leadership at Hood are become very good friends of mine, and we'll do things together outside of work. And if you have that kind of relationship, you can have it. It's a great thing to have, and it helps immensely when things are tough and when people are under a lot of pressure, and there's there are demands on the business that everyone's trying to meet. And if you can pull together as a team, you're going to be much better off doing that. So yeah, those are critical relationships, and I really don't think you can be successful in a role like this unless you're able to establish them. I've seen other situations where they were not so great, and I've seen the toll they took on both the company and the people involved, and it's really not a pleasant thing to watch or observe. So I urge anyone thinking about this role to really think hard about that part of it. It's really important.
Do you have any opinion, Paul, on reporting into a CFO as opposed to a CEO or some other member of the executive team? So a sort of tertiary reporting relationship as opposed directly into the chief executive?
I mean, I think it's critical to report into the chief executive. I mean, I think that the lawyers need to have the ear of the top person at the company. Reporting to the CFO, I realize that people have this arrangement and this relationship, and I'm sure there are justifications for it, but in my mind, I would be very leery about taking a general counsel job in a situation where I did not report to the CEO. If you don't have that person's ear, you're not going to be able to be as effective as you should be for the organization.
I agree with that. So another question that just came in is around experience with corporate governance, SEC, board of director experience. How critical is that for someone looking for a GC role?
First of all, I did not have that. I did join a private company, so the SEC public company requirements are not some. I did work at Cabot, which was a public company, so I have some degree of familiarity with them, but they were less important to my role. Clearly, if you want to join a public company, I personally would need some more knowledge in that area because it's not something that I have spent a lot of time in. But it is important. I mean, running the board meetings, managing that, helping to get that process done correctly is really important. I mean, I work for a family-owned company, so it's a family business, and all the managers, we're an LLC, so we have managers instead of board members, and they are all members of the family. And so there's a certain different dynamic involved in that, which those of you who work for family companies and businesses probably can understand. But it's something that is important. It's a lot of decisions made outside of those meetings, at least this company. So, you know, the decision-making process is probably less important there than it might be in other places. But clearly, the general counsel plays a very important role in that process, and it's clearly an important part of the job, no question.
Okay. So another question here: are there particular areas of the law that are most helpful in experience to have or to have some experience in when you're looking to move into the GC role?
Clearly, business transactions are the bread and butter of what we do, and you know, experience in that is I think critically necessary. You know, understanding contract law pretty well and basics of it is important, really important. So I would say the most important things would be that. Now, you know, then beyond that, it'll depend a little bit on the company and what they do. And you know, if the company is a tech company, it would be very helpful to have a lot of IP and tech knowledge and experience. If it's, you know, depending on if it's a financial one, obviously the financial world has got its own set of rules and regs. So it'll depend a little bit on the nature of the company, but clearly the bread and butter, at least for us and for I think most businesses, is sort of general business transactions, general contracting work. Things that are less important, I think, tend to be litigation and, you know, highly specialized areas where, you know, you typically go outside to find in a law firm. You tend to find that expertise, you know, externally rather than internally, unless you're very big and have a lot of resources. Cabot was a big company, and I think we had 15 members of the law department at one point when I was there. So, you know, they were like a mini law firm. But we're not like that here. We're just more generalists, and just a few of us.
So I'm curious, one area of specialization is intellectual property. Do you have a role in that? Does that come into play at ACC Hood?
Actually, it does come into play for sure at Hood. And I was going to mention that as probably the secondary, or the next most important thing to have knowledge of, especially in the economy that we have today, in the world we live in today. Intellectual property affects us in many ways. We have a huge trademark portfolio. We do have a few patents. We have many trade secrets in terms of formulations for our products. We have issues around IP that we deal with, both in terms of doing transactions, but also in terms of just the organic development of our business. And so we, you know, yes, clearly IP, I would say IP would come in second on the list of things to know about and have at least a basic understanding of, if you're going to take on a job like this in a position like this. So that would be another very important area.
Okay, great. Let me just look here. So do you have any organizational recommendations around the difference between full-time equivalents or full-time attorneys and outsourcing? Is there a right mix? How do you approach that? What tips could you give the audience?
It's, for us, I'll tell you how we do it, and then, I mean, I'm not sure if it's a tip or not, but we have processing plants throughout New England, New York, Virginia, and Sacramento, California, and so that's sort of our footprint. We sell products both locally, the branded Hood products that people are familiar with in the supermarket, sold in New England and upstate New York, but also we have a portfolio of national products: Lactaid, Almond Breeze, almond milk, Planet Oat milk. All these sort of alternative dairy products, we've gone heavily into that space in recent years. And so we sell those nationally. So what we do is we tend to need lawyers in the jurisdictions in which we operate, such as New York, California, Virginia, et cetera. And we tend to hire real estate lawyers and labor and employment, or employment lawyers in those places to handle issues that relate to those operations in that specific place. Or if we have any transaction related to those states, we would use them for that. We have a couple of big firms here in Boston that we use for transactional work. We have another couple of big firms we use for litigation, commercial litigation work. We would outsource that typically. And then for any specialty work that affects our industry, FDA, USDA, regulatory matters, FTC stuff, things like that, we typically go to Washington, D.C. and hire firms down there who specialize in those areas. So we have FDA counsel in D.C. We have that same firm handles the USDA matters when they come up. We have other firms down there that handle antitrust and things that are more of a specialized nature for our industry. So that's how we decide to outsource. You know, a basic contract with a customer or a supplier or you know, things of that nature, we try to do all that in here, and we pretty much are successful at it. It's very rare we have to outsource something like that. If we have a small acquisition of a line of business, you know, and it's not huge and it's something that we have time to work on, we will handle that internally ourselves. But if it's going to involve a lot of assets and be a fairly significant size, we'll typically bring an outside firm in to handle it. You know, litigation, we never do in-house. We outsource all of that. If there's an employment claim, we'll outsource that for sure. You know, we'll work on the strategy with the lawyers involved, but we'll let them do the investigating and come up with the position statements. And that's pretty much how we do it. You know, we have an IP firm, so a couple IP firms actually. So if we have IP issues, we go to them on those. That's pretty much how we've done it. And I think what we try to do is who can get this done the quickest and most efficiently whenever we have an issue. And that's pretty much how we decide whether to outsource or not.
So
budget
by way of example,
is probably, I would say, maybe a third of the money we spend in-house and 2/3 we spend on outside counsel.
okay.
Something like that.
So in my last role, it reached a point where I was spending enough money on intellectual property external spend that I thought it justified having an internal person. Tell me about that a little bit for you, like, and just looking at what you've observed over your career. How do you make that pitch? Does it make sense? How do you articulate that to the CEO that it's time to grow the team?
Well, let's see. I guess I don't really have a direct answer to that. I think you kind of know it when you see it, really, more than anything else. But one of my two lawyers specializes in all of the marketing stuff that we have, the trademarks. You know, working with the marketing team on ad copy and on social media stuff and all of that. So we have a little bit of specialization in that regard here, but generally. And I actually encourage her and my other lawyer to broaden themselves and to do as much as they can, you know, in other areas so they don't get sort of shunted into one specialty practice area. But I agree with you that if it got to a point where we had, you know, enough patent or IP work to keep somebody busy full time, yeah, at that point we'd probably bring someone in and hire them and have them on staff. We haven't been at that point. I don't envision getting there unless we go out and buy a bunch of new businesses that no one's told me about. So for the moment, anyway, I think we're staffed the right way. But you know, we look at the spending obviously every year and figure out how much we're spending in certain areas. And you know, so far at least, that spend in specialty areas has not been high enough to warrant bringing somebody on full time to handle that work.
Okay. So you mentioned briefly contract management software. Thinking about technology for legal departments overall, how important is it for you as a GC to be an expert in that space?
Well, I would never purport to be an expert in that space and certainly don't want to be an expert in that space. I think it's important I've realized, as you know, increasingly over time, it's important for me to have a basic understanding of the technology that we use and that is available for our use, and to try to figure out with others, particularly our folks in our IT group, the best and most efficient way to proceed in that way. It's you know, COVID has just reinforced this, because by being virtual and being remote, we've had to rely heavily on the technology systems that we have in place. And unfortunately, I lost my admin in the middle of COVID, and so we're sort of working with temps now, and so it's made the technology and the use of it even more critically important, because we got a new person in who doesn't really know all the systems here, and we're trying to keep the lights on, if you will, with the contracts and everything, and having clunky technology is not helpful in that process, which unfortunately we have at the moment. But so that has reinforced for me, COVID has reinforced for me the need to be better about technology. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, DocuSign, I mean, that technology has been a godsend and really saved us a lot of agony of getting things, executed during this time when we're all separated from each other. So it's important, but I don't ever want to purport to be and won't purport to be an expert in it. I just want to have a basic understanding of it, the pros and cons and the costs associated with it, and then make some business decisions about what we're going to use going forward, for both us and for our colleagues, because our colleagues use this system as much as we do, and they've expressed frustration of late of, we have this thing we built 15 years ago, and it's just sort of outlived its useful life, so now it's time to replace.
Right, okay. So another question here is, bear with me, I'm sorry. In developing staff in the current environment, is there anything unique or different that you're doing since we started sheltering in place?
Well, I mentioned the phone calls that we have. That's been, I guess, the most important one, I would say. Anything I'm doing differently? I guess I'm more cognizant of the need to check in with my team on a regular basis beyond the phone calls. I try to put myself in their shoes and understand what they're thinking about, and what concerns they might have. And so, my main goal is to make sure that they have the resources they need and the support they need to be successful. And I try to make it clear to them that that's important, and I want to hear from them if there is anything that is needed. Beyond that, I've got a great team. I mean, they're seasoned senior lawyers, both of them, and they don't really need a lot of developing, not from me anyway. I mean, they know what they're doing, and they can, and they're great people. And I'm sure that if I were to get hit by a car tomorrow, they could step into this job, either one of them, and do a great job. So, I have the luxury of not having a very junior person that I need to develop at the moment. Someday maybe that'll change, and I'll have to rethink how I do it. But at least for now, I'm pretty.
So let's talk about financial chops. How important is it for you to really have a deep understanding of the overall budgeting process at the company to be able to talk the talk around finances?
Well, I think it's important to have a basic understanding of finance in general, and then the budgetary process at the company specifically. I don't feel I need to have a deep dive or have have a really deep background there, because there are other people here who have that, and their jobs are to provide that information. But certainly knowing how to read, financial statements, knowing how to understand budgets and how they're constructed and what's involved in them, and that process, those are important things to know for sure. And any senior executive of any kind, I think, is going to have some idea of that, or they won't be in their job for very long, I'm sure. So I guess I found that, I think I mentioned to you that I did a stint at Harvard in the middle of my career. I did I learned the basics of finance in that stint, and I think that was very helpful. And if someone is contemplating this kind of role and they don't have that background, then I would urge them to find a way to get some continuing education in that area. And again, you're not going to need to learn how to manipulate spreadsheets or how to put numbers down or create financial reports, but you need to understand how to read them, work with them, and what goes into them, and how they're constructed. And I think having that knowledge is helpful to anybody who's going to have a role, in a senior role in-house, or certainly in a general counsel role.
And a similar question for people management skills. Is it important to have that before moving into a GC role? What was your experience managing people prior to becoming GC?
Let me just think about this. I did have a couple of people report to me at Cabot for a short period of time. But I kind of learned it on my own. In the firm, I actually had younger lawyers who I was mentoring. So it is important to have, but I don't think I think many people who come into this job have a lot of it. I mean, maybe in big companies they do, but not certainly in the background I had. It was minimal, usually a handful of people at any given time. Certainly in bigger departments where you've got responsibility for many more people, and I would think it'd be more important than it is in a situation like I am in. But I think, being able to manage people is important for any senior executive that's going to have people report to them. If you don't have that, I've seen careers founder in tragic ways because people didn't have that skill set and were unable to effectively manage the people they work, no matter how smart they were. I mean, it's not a question of smarts, it's a question of, I think, attitude, demeanor, and how you approach it more than anything else.
And I think that's true going in all different directions, right? Managing up, managing laterally, and managing down. Yeah.
No question.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So you mentioned briefly making difficult decisions around staffing. Hopefully that's something that none of us look forward to doing, but how does that impact you in your GC role across the organization? What role do you play in terminations, in downsizing, in risk?
Well, any termination that is considered risky, I have a role in. We have a role in the law department, and most of the employment stuff comes across my desk. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So, as a general proposition, if there are difficult employment situations that either we know are going to be risky or that we fear could turn risky, then our HR group is pretty good about consulting with me on those. It's pretty rare. It's very rare, actually, when I don't know about something, in advance through the HR folks that becomes a problem for us legally. Obviously, in my personal situation, it's tough to just take people who you work with and just tell them they're not going to work out and they need to find another job. That's always a hard thing to do. I've fortunately only had to do that a couple of times and haven't had too much. I haven't had to lay off people. I've never had to go through a rift. But I think all those would be very, very painful things to have to go through, and it's one of the things I don't look forward to and hope I don't have to do before my career ends. But yeah, I mean, clearly, in this company, I would hope in most companies that have in-house lawyers, that the in-house lawyers would be involved in termination decisions that have the potential to lead to legal action. And we've been very, in the 17 years I've been here at Hood, we've had, I will say, at any given time, we have maybe 3,000 employees total spread across the company. At any given time, we have maybe 3 or 4 matters which are employment related. Somebody's filed a claim with one of the state human rights organizations, or there's some issue that's going on, and we've been able to deal with almost all of them. I think we've tried maybe 2 of them, judgments both in Hood's favor, and then we've managed to settle out the others at reasonable settlement. So a lot of it, if they're managed well, I think you can manage through that and get to the other side. In most cases, not always, but sometimes.
So we've talked about other functions: IT, HR, marketing, a little bit about the finance CFO. What are the key relationships for general counsel, someone leading a function from the legal perspective?
In this company, VP of sales is important to me. A good relationship with that person. CFO and the CEO are, I think, go sort of without saying, but they're critically important. And then the VP of HR is important because a lot of legal stuff comes through the HR group, as I just mentioned a minute ago. There are others that are important too, but I would say if you had to rank them, I would put CEO and CFO at the top, sales right underneath, and then HR, below that, and then afterward, our VP of Ops. Obviously, operations is critically important in the company, but they have fewer legal issues given the amount of people they have and the amount of work they're involved in. But when we have, it's important to have a good relationship for sure, no question about it.
All right, so we're going to wrap up here in a minute. Any closing thoughts, Paul, that you'd like to share with the group?
Well, I would say wear a mask, socially distance, all that stuff. But, seriously, I guess I would say that it is incredibly rewarding to have a job like this. It is, it's pressure packed, but it's also fun often. And I can't recommend it enough to people who think that they may want to go this route. And that it takes doggedness, it takes persistence, it takes willingness to think outside the box sometimes. The other thing I would say, and I meant to mention this earlier, but I didn't, take risks with your career. It was a risk for me to go to Harvard Business School and consider leaving the law altogether. It was a risk for me to come back to Cabot and then sort of have not really sure what I was going to do at that point because my old job had been taken by somebody else. It was a risk when I stepped out the door, to go to Cabot originally, and it was a risk to go to Hood. But I think it's important to take risks in your career if you want to get ahead, if you want to advance yourself. So I would urge you to do that. I mean, they should be calculated risks. They shouldn't be crazy ones. And you should prepare for them to not go awry as well. But clearly, at least in my career, that's been an important thing for me to have done.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun for me. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. I'm going to just quickly mention a couple of programs. We have a program coming up on the 17th on recent Supreme Court rulings that's sponsored by our Diversity Committee and Mintz Levin. And then on the 23rd, we have, so actually this one is being postponed. This is September 30th. We're going to push that out until October. But before that, on September 23rd, we have a basic tech and cyber competency program being put on by Dave Pitney and with some of our in-house membership. And then on October 6th, we have a program on employee non-competes. And on October 8th, I'm actually really excited about this. We have Colleen Terrell, who is an expert to come and talk about LinkedIn and the benefit of using LinkedIn to foster connections. So, and as you can see here on the screen, please follow us on either LinkedIn or Twitter. We have a YouTube channel where you can see a lot of our content. And Paul, I want to say again, thank you. I really enjoyed chatting with you. It was a lot of fun. The time flew by. And thanks again to folks for joining. If you've enjoyed this, let us know. We can do more programs like this with other GCs and members of the chapter. So we're happy to get some input and understand if this was beneficial to you and if you'd like more. So once again, thanks, Paul. And a quick thanks to Julie Duffy, our Executive Director, for helping us put this together. Like Paul, I'm not a technical expert at all, so we really needed her help along with our social media folks at Social Advocacy, and in particular, Cord Silverstein. So thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Take care.
Bye.